I still remember how that morning felt, like waking up in a dream I had been waiting for all my life. The sunlight spilled through the curtains in a golden haze, and for a fleeting second I thought heaven itself was blessing me. My heart thumped with anticipation. Today was the day I would finally say, "I do," to the man I believed was my great love. The scent of fresh roses, white, my favorite, filled my room, a gift from my best friend the night before. My wedding dress hung on the closet door like a cloud of silk and lace, delicate yet powerful. I ran my hand along the fabric, imagining myself walking down the aisle, all eyes on me, smiles lighting up the room. "Today," I whispered to myself, "is the beginning of our fairy tale." My mother came in carrying a tray. "You need to eat something," she said softly, her eyes already wet with emotion. She placed a cup of tea on the nightstand, but my stomach was too tight with nerves. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My hair, curled into loose waves, fell just right around my shoulders. The makeup artist had made my eyes shimmer without covering who I was beneath. I smiled at my reflection and whispered, "This is the happiest day of my life." The house filled with voices, laughter, and the sound of hurried footsteps. My bridesmaids floated around in pastel dresses. My father fiddled nervously with his tie pin. The air buzzed with excitement. When the car arrived to take me to the church, my knees trembled. Neighbors waved, children shouted my name. I felt like a princess stepping into her storybook. The church doors opened wide and soft music filled the air. My eyes caught a glimpse of him at the altar, my soon-to-be husband. He looked handsome in his navy suit, a rose pinned to his lapel, matching my bouquet. He smiled, or at least something that looked like a smile, and I convinced myself it was pride and love. As my father guided me down the aisle, it felt like I was floating. Everyone's eyes were on me. Some dabbed their eyes, others grinned from ear to ear. The organ swelled, wrapping me in music. When I reached him, his gaze locked on mine. A shiver ran down my spine, an unfamiliar intensity, but I pushed the thought away. This was love. This was our moment. The priest spoke of vows, love, and forever. My fingers trembled in his, but I clung on. When it was my turn to speak, my voice quivered with raw emotion. I told him he was my choice above all else, that I trusted him with my heart and my future. The crowd sniffled, tears glistened on faces. When his turn came, silence stretched too long. He finally spoke, words measured and short. "I promise to love you, to protect you, to never let you go." Applause erupted, music swelled again, and sunlight streamed through the tall windows. For everyone else, it was perfect. For me, it was too perfect, like glass that could shatter at any moment. The reception was a blur of laughter, clinking glasses, and voices shouting blessings. Guests hugged us, kissed our cheeks, raised their drinks. Children danced in circles, while waiters carried trays of champagne. I floated through the room, glowing in my dress, my smile painted wide. But next to me, he seemed different. His movements were stiff, his laughter delayed. His hand gripped mine too tightly, as if to remind me who I belonged to. I brushed it off as nerves. The day was overwhelming, after all. But when my 6-year-old niece ran up and tugged at my dress, calling me the most beautiful princess she'd ever seen, I bent down laughing to hug her. When I looked up, his eyes burned into me, dark, sharp, unsettling. His jaw tightened, as if the innocent affection of a child was an offense. During the photos, he pulled me closer than necessary. "You need to stand properly," he whispered, his voice low only for me. I forced my smile for the camera, though unease twisted in my stomach. At dinner, the toasts began. My father's voice cracked with pride. His best friend shared stories from their college days. The hall roared with laughter, glasses lifted high. But each time someone praised me, my beauty, my smile, my strength, I felt his hand press harder against my knee beneath the table. A warning disguised as intimacy. When my aunt said, "You deserve a man who will carry you on his shoulders forever," the table cheered. I laughed nervously, but his grip turned almost painful. Later, needing air, I slipped outside. The summer night smelled of flowers and grass. I inhaled deeply, telling myself this was still my dream. Then the door closed behind me. His hand clamped around my arm. Why do you have to act like that in there?" He hissed. "Like what?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. "Too much attention. Too many smiles. You play the princess too well." His words sliced like knives. "It's my wedding day," I said, my throat tightening. "Can't I be happy?" He released my arm, but the heat of his grip lingered. His eyes were stormy, unreadable. Then, when someone inside called our names, he forced a smile and led me back in as though nothing had happened. No one noticed. To them, he was the perfect groom. To me, his smile had become a mask I no longer trusted. It happened so quickly, I almost wondered if I had imagined it. We were standing together near the head table, surrounded by chatter and music. Guests leaned in, congratulating us. My cheeks hurt from smiling, but inside, unease churned. His hand lingered too heavily on my back, guiding me like a puppet. Then came the moment. A guest, an old friend of mine, hugged me warmly, holding my hand a second too long in his eyes. I laughed, pulling away, but I felt the storm building beside me. His voice dropped, low and sharp. "Don't touch him like that again." Before I could even respond, his hand struck my cheek. The sound silenced the room. Glasses froze mid-air, forks paused above plates. My face stung, my vision blurred, and I realized in horror what had just happened. I looked around. Dozens of eyes stared at us, some wide with shock, some turning away in disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father rose from his chair, his face pale with fury. And yet he stood there, chest heaving, eyes blazing. For a split second he looked triumphant, as though he had proven a point, as though I now belonged entirely to him. But then reality crashed over him. Murmurs filled the room. My father took a step forward. My mother sobbed quietly. His mask cracked, and I saw fear flicker across his face. 30 minutes later, he would be on his knees. But in that moment, I stood frozen. The fairy tale shattered, my world splintered beyond repair. The slap echoed louder than the music ever could. It rang in my ears, louder than the gasps that rippled across the room. For a few heartbeats, time stood still. I touched my cheek. It burned beneath my fingers, but what burned deeper was the humiliation. The stares pierced me. Faces of family, friends, colleagues, all frozen, unsure whether they had truly witnessed what had just happened. The music faltered. Glasses clinked nervously as some tried to pretend nothing had happened. Others whispered, their voices trembling. My mother's sob was the only sound that seemed real. I looked at him. He stood rigid, jaw tight, eyes defiant. He didn't apologize. He didn't look ashamed. He only looked angry that anyone had dared to see behind the curtain. My father's chair screeched back. He was on his feet, fists clenched, fury radiating from him. For a second, I thought he would strike him right there. But the priest, God bless him, stepped forward, placing a hand on my father's arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. My father froze, trembling with rage. The guests sat stiffly, as though caught between duty and disbelief. Some looked at me with pity, others looked away, pretending the fairy tale wasn't already shattered. And me? I stood there, my veil heavy on my head, my cheek flaming, my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. I thought, this is how it begins. This is how the silence swallows women whole. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to grab my dress and flee into the night, to disappear, to breathe, to escape this nightmare masquerading as a wedding. But another voice rose inside me. No. I thought of all the times I had ignored the subtle signs, the sharp tone when I laughed too loudly, the grip on my arm when I spoke to another man, the way his compliments were sometimes coated with poison. I had told myself they were nothing, that love was sacrifice, that every man had flaws, and now, in front of everyone I loved, the mask was gone. The monster stood bare. I turned to face him. My voice trembled but carried through the hall. "You hit me!" The words cut through the suffocating silence. A murmur swept across the room. He flinched, not at guilt but at exposure. "Yes," he hissed under his breath, "just for me. And you'll do as I say from now on." I felt my knees weaken. For a heartbeat, I nearly collapsed beneath the weight of it all. But then I saw my niece, her wide, innocent eyes brimming with tears. I saw my mother shaking her head, pleading silently for me to be strong. Something hardened inside me. I straightened my spine. "No," I whispered back. "Not anymore." The rest of the evening blurred like a fever dream. Some guests tried to carry on, to salvage what was left of the celebration, but the air was poisoned, heavy with shame and disbelief. He tried to grab my hand again, to force me back into the role of smiling bride. But I pulled away. For the first time, I felt the strength in my own defiance. I stood before the room, trembling yet resolute. "This is not love," I said, my voice raw. "This is not who I am." Gasps filled the hall. My father's eyes shone with pride, my mother with relief. A friend clapped her hand over her mouth, crying silently. He, the man I had just promised forever to, looked at me as though I had betrayed him. His lips curled, ready to snarl, to command, to crush me back into silence. But the power had shifted. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, in the desperation flickering in his eyes. For the first time that day, I wasn't the one trembling. He was, and in that moment I knew I would not be his victim. Not tonight, not ever. The room was trembling with tension, though no one moved. I stood in the center, my words still hanging in the air. His face hardened, his fists clenched at his sides, but for the first time, the control was slipping from him. He tried to step closer. "Sit down," he whispered fiercely. His voice meant only for me, but I didn't move. Around us, the guests stirred. My father rose again. My bridesmaids shifted nervously, torn between fear and loyalty. The atmosphere was charged, like thunderclouds about to burst. "You're embarrassing yourself," he hissed. "No," I said, louder this time, my voice breaking the silence. "You embarrassed us both the moment you raised your hand." The gasp that followed was collective, like the entire room exhaled at once. His face drained of color, then flushed red. He opened his mouth to lash out again, but words failed him. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of his anger. I saw it for what it was, weakness disguised as strength. It happened so quickly I almost didn't understand it. One moment, he was rigid, defiant, glaring at me with fury. The next, his knees buckled. He fell forward, hands clasped, as though the weight of the moment had crushed him. "I'm sorry," he choked, his voice breaking. His head bowed, his entire body trembling. "Please, forgive me." The hall erupted into whispers. Some guests looked away in discomfort. Others leaned forward to watch the spectacle unfold. I stared down at him. The man I had thought was my prince, now collapsed at my feet like a broken figure. "Please," he begged again, grabbing at the hem of my dress. His tears dripped onto the white fabric, staining it. "I didn't mean it. Don't leave me. Don't humiliate me like this." And in that instant, I realized the truth. He wasn't kneeling out of love. He wasn't kneeling because he understood. He was kneeling because he had been seen, because his mask had shattered and he couldn't piece it back together. I looked at him on the floor, sobbing, begging, clinging. For years I had seen only what I wanted to see, the charming smile, the promises, the dream he painted for me. But now, under the harsh light of reality, I saw the truth. This wasn't strength. This wasn't love. This was control, fear, desperation. I looked around the room. Faces I loved stared back at me, some pleading, some horrified, some proud. And in their eyes I found my reflection. I saw a woman who had been silenced too long. A woman who had confused control for devotion, who had mistaken fear for loyalty, and now that woman was gone. I straightened my shoulders. "Stand up," I said to him, my voice steady. He obeyed, shaky, broken, eyes searching mine for mercy. But I had none left to give. I walked away. My dress dragged across the floor, stained now with his tears, but lighter than it had ever felt. My veil slipped off as I moved, falling behind me like the last remnant of a dream I no longer wanted. The doors of the hall opened, and the night air rushed in, cool, fresh, alive. I stepped outside, my heart pounding not with fear, but with freedom. Behind me, I heard voices, my mother calling my name, my father's footsteps quick to follow. But in that moment, I didn't need anyone. For the first time, I felt the strength in my own steps. I wasn't the bride he tried to own. I wasn't the victim he tried to break. I was me, whole, free, and unafraid. And though my wedding day had begun with a slap, it ended with something far greater, the birth of a woman who would never bow again. The night air wrapped around me like a cloak of freedom. Each step I took away from that hall, away from the shattered illusion of love, felt heavier, and yet strangely lighter. My gown dragged along the dirt path, picking up dust and grass, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I didn't care about appearances or about pleasing anyone else. The silence outside was different from the suffocating silence inside. Out here, it was peaceful, honest. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind and the distant hum of crickets. I tilted my head back, and above me the sky stretched endless and alive, speckled with stars. How ironic that on the night my world fell apart, the universe glittered so beautifully. Behind me, the church lights glowed faintly, muffled voices leaking into the night. I knew they were talking about me, some pitying, some scandalized, some angry on my behalf. But none of that mattered. Their opinions were theirs. My truth was mine. I thought back to the girl I had been that morning, staring into the mirror, whispering promises of fairy tales and forever. I wanted to hold her, to tell her she was strong enough to survive disappointment, heartbreak, even betrayal, that her worth wasn't tied to a man's approval or his temper, that her story didn't end in a church with a slap. It began on a dirt path under the stars. Tears rolled down my cheeks, hot and heavy, but this time they weren't just from pain. They were from release, from letting go, from realizing I didn't need him kneeling in shame to validate me. I didn't need his regret or his begging. I needed only myself, my voice, my courage, my choice. The fields stretched wide on either side, wildflowers bending gently in the breeze. I thought of my mother, her eyes filled with worry and pride. My father, fists clenched but heartbreaking for me. My niece, wide-eyed, learning a lesson about strength far earlier than she should. I walked not only for myself, but for them too. For every woman who had been silenced, every bride who had mistaken fear for devotion. When I reached the crest of the hill, I turned once more. In the distance, I could still see the faint outline of the church, but it no longer held power over me. It was just a building now, just a place where one story had ended. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the cool night air. The path ahead was uncertain, winding, perhaps even lonely, but it was mine. Mine to walk, mine to shape, mine to own. I smiled through my tears, a small, fragile smile, but real. The stars seemed to twinkle brighter, as if the universe itself was nodding in approval. I whispered into the night, not to him, not to the guests, not to anyone else but me. This is not the end. This is the beginning. And with that, I walked forward, into the unknown, into my freedom, into a life where I would never bow again.